That night, Tom only meant to slip an arm around his wife before bed, but the moment his hand touched Evelyn's shoulder, a spotted blur exploded up from the edge of the mattress. A 30-pound bobcat planted herself between them and growled like he was a stranger breaking in. She was a wild predator, born to hunt in the Carolina woods, yet for 10 long years she'd treated this 68-year-old woman as territory she had to guard at all costs. No one really understood why, until the secrets from a frozen storm, an illegal trap in the trees, and a near-fatal collapse at Town Hall finally came to light. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. By the time Evelyn Parker turned off the highway and onto the narrow lane that led up to her house, the world had turned to glass. Ice clung to the power lines and the bare maple branches, glittering in the beams of her old pickup. The wipers squeaked over the windshield, pushing aside sleet that had started again just when the weather report had promised it was done. "Lies," she muttered, easing her foot off the gas. "They're all lies." She was 68, long retired from the ER, but nights like this brought all the old instincts back. She kept her hands at 10 and 2, shoulders tight, eyes scanning the ditch for downed branches and black ice. The county had warned everyone to stay home unless it was an emergency. Evelyn had gone out anyway, because the church basement still had people sleeping on cots, and somebody had to make sure their blood pressure meds were taken on time. She worried more these days about health insurance, prescription costs, and whether her small Social Security check and what was left in her retirement savings would stretch. The little thrift shop she ran out of her garage barely covered the mortgage and home insurance, but it kept her busy and gave her an excuse to keep helping people. That, she told herself, was worth more than any high-yield savings account. She turned the last curve, tires crunching on frozen gravel. Her house sat on a low rise just below the tree line, a pale farmhouse with a deep back porch and a view of the Blue Ridge that, in summer, could make you forget every bill on the kitchen table. Tonight she could barely see the porch through the sleet. She'd just started up the drive when she heard it. At first, Evelyn thought it was the wind, a high note sliding over the ridge. Then it came again, thin and sharp, cutting through the rattle of ice on the truck's hood. A sound like a baby crying, only wrong somehow, wilder, desperate. She rolled down the window a crack. Freezing air slapped her cheeks. The sound came again, from somewhere behind the house, near the dark line of trees. "Oh, no," she whispered, "not tonight." Tom would have told her to go inside, lock the doors, and call someone with a badge and a good home security system. Tom wasn't here tonight. He was at his brother's place down the mountain, helping with a busted pipe. And even if he had been, Evelyn knew herself. She'd walked into too many bad situations over 40 years in the ER to pretend she could ignore a cry like that. She pulled the truck up beside the house, killed the engine, and grabbed the heavy flashlight from the passenger seat. The cold bit straight through her coat when she stepped out. Her boots slid a little on the icy gravel as she made her way around the side of the house toward the backyard. The cry came again, weaker now. "I hear you," she called softly. "Hang on, baby. I'm coming." The beam of her flashlight jerked over the frozen lawn, the picnic table, the bird feeder bent under the weight of ice. At the edge of the yard, the ground dropped steeply into a strip of woods, oaks, and pines crowding together, branches heavy with glassy sheen. Evelyn followed the sound carefully, planting each step, feeling the old ache in her knees complain. The flashlight caught something metal ahead, a dull, ugly shine against the snow. She squinted and moved closer. It was a trap. A steel leg-hold trap, half buried in slush, its chain bolted to a stake pounded into the frozen ground. In front of it lay the body of a bobcat, the fur along its spotted flank stiff and rimed with ice. The animal's leg was mangled where the trap had bitten through. Its eyes were open but flat, already gone. The cry came from beside the dead cat. For a second, Evelyn didn't see it. Then the tiny shape moved, a shadow tucked against the mother's belly. A kitten, mottled fur soaked, one paw scraped raw where it had clearly tried and failed to climb over the steel. Its ribs showed under the fur. The little mouth opened and let out another ragged, broken call. "Oh, sweetheart," Evelyn breathed. She set the flashlight down, letting it angle toward them, and dropped to her knees in the snow. Her fingers were clumsy in the cold as she reached for the trap to see if it was still set, but one look at the mother's crushed leg told her the jaws had done their work and snapped shut long ago. Somebody had set it here on purpose, close to her property line, and walked away. She swallowed a curse. Whoever it was, they were probably saving on their own pest control, a cheap solution that would cost her more in sleep than any life insurance policy could repay. The kitten tried to back away, but had nowhere to go. It hissed, or tried to. The sound came out weak and wet. "I'm not going to hurt you," she murmured, the old ER tone slipping effortlessly into place, the one she'd used on frightened children and grown men who didn't want to admit how scared they were. "You're freezing. We don't have time to argue." She shrugged out of her coat, ignoring the way the wind knifed instantly through her sweater. With slow, steady hands, she wrapped the little bobcat in the thick fabric, leaving only its small face exposed. It squirmed once, then went limp against the sudden warmth, eyes closing to slits. "There you go," she said. "Just for tonight. We'll figure the rest out in the morning." Evelyn lifted the bundle to her chest, tucking it under her chin the way she'd done with premature babies under two bright hospital lights. The heartbeat against her ribs was faint but present, a quick flutter like a trapped bird. As she stood, she made herself do what training had taught her. She looked around. The woods were quiet, branches clinking gently in the wind. The beam of her flashlight swept over trunks and undergrowth, piles of ice-coated leaves. For a moment it caught something darker between the trees, a shape, tall and still, like a man in a heavy coat, standing just beyond the property line, watching. Her breath caught. "Hello," she called, voice sharper now. "Is somebody there?" The shape shifted once, or maybe it was just the branches moving. By the time she swung the light back, it was gone, swallowed by the dark. Her scalp prickled under her damp hair. Somebody had set that trap. Maybe they hadn't liked that she chased hunters off her land every fall. Maybe they were hoping to catch a fox, a raccoon, anything with fur to sell. Maybe they didn't care what suffered in the meantime. "I saw that," she whispered under her breath, more to herself than to whoever might still be listening. And so did God. The kitten stirred against her chest, letting out a tiny, exhausted sound. Its breath warmed the hollow of her throat. Evelyn bent her head over the little bundle and started back up toward the house, boots crunching on the frozen slope. Her fingers were numb, her teeth chattering, but she held that small life as carefully as any fragile item in her thrift shop, more precious than all the credit cards and retirement plans and polished antiques in the world. Just one night, she told it again, though she was old enough to know the trouble in that promise. Just one night, Ember. Then we'll see. Behind her, the woods creaked and whispered. Up ahead, the house waited, lights off, roof shining under its glaze of ice. She clutched the kitten closer, feeling the tiny heart still fighting beside her own, and stepped into the circle of her porch light, not yet knowing that the small, half-frozen bundle in her arms would one day stand between her and everyone who tried to come too close. The power went out just after midnight. Evelyn had known it was coming. The lights had already flickered twice while she warmed a towel in the dryer and boiled water on the gas stove. When the house finally went dark, it was almost a relief. At least now she knew what she was working with. "Okay," she said into the dim, mostly to herself. "Just you and me now, kiddo." She had set the bundled kitten in a laundry basket lined with old flannel sheets close to the wood stove. For the first half-hour, the little body hadn't moved much, just shallow breathing and the occasional twitch. Evelyn had checked its gums, its eyes, the color of its tongue, the way she'd checked human patients in the ER. The numbers were different, but the signs were the same: shock, hypothermia, dehydration. She pulled a kitchen chair closer, wrapped herself in an extra blanket, and sat watch like it was any overnight shift. Outside, the ice storm creaked its way through the trees. Inside, the only sounds were the tick of cooling pipes and the soft hiss of the stove. Now and then her mind wandered to ordinary worries: whether the pipes would freeze, whether her home insurance would cover damage if a branch came down on the roof, whether the next Medicare statement would bring another surprise bill. She knew she should be thinking about retirement plans and interest rates, but tonight all of that felt far away. Tonight, the whole world had shrunk to the size of the small, spotted bundle in that basket. Around 2 in the morning, the kitten stirred. Evelyn leaned forward, heart jumping. One tiny paw pushed out from the edge of her coat, claws flexing. The little mouth opened in a silent yawn, then snapped shut again. Golden eyes blinked, unfocused but aware. "There you are," she whispered. "Welcome back." She had mixed a bit of electrolyte solution in a baby syringe she kept for bottle-feeding abandoned kittens that passed through the thrift shop. She slid a hand under the bobcat's head, gently, letting it smell her skin. It made a faint sound, not quite a growl, not quite a meow, and then, to her quiet amazement, it licked at the offered liquid. "That's it," she murmured, giving it a few drops at a time. "Slow and steady. We don't want to upset your tummy on top of everything else." When it had taken all it could, the kitten sagged against her palm, exhausted. On impulse, she lifted it out of the basket and tucked it against her chest, inside the blanket, so its head rested just under her collarbone. Its fur was still damp, but warmer now. After a moment, she felt it, a faint vibration, a tremor that built into a soft, steady purr. The sound went straight through her. She remembered other nights, other heartbeats pressed close. Her first husband snoring softly in the hospital visitor chair after her back surgery. The tiny weight of her newborn daughter asleep on her chest while monitors beeped around them, the heavy, drooling bulldog they'd adopted late in life because the house felt too empty. All gone now, one way or another. "Don't you start that," she told the kitten gently, blinking away the sting in her eyes. "I'm too old to have my heart broken again." The purring didn't slow. Just before dawn, the storm began to ease. The sleet turned to a thin, miserable rain, tapping at the windows instead of cracking across them. The temperature in the house dropped another degree. Evelyn threw 2 more logs in the stove and checked the kitten's paws and nose again. Warmer, color better, breathing deeper. "Good enough," she said, more to calm her own worry than to make any medical declaration. "We've bought you a little time." When her cell signal flickered back to life, she called the vet. "Patel Veterinary, this is Dr. Patel," a tired voice answered on the second ring. She could hear a generator humming faintly in the background. "Raj, it's Evelyn up on Ridge Road," she said. "I've got a situation." She described the trap, the dead mother, the kitten's condition. She could almost see him rubbing his forehead on the other end. "You know what I'm going to say," he sighed. "You have to call wildlife. You can't keep a bobcat." "I didn't keep him," she said. "I kept him alive. There's a difference." He was quiet for a moment. "How bad off is he?" "Better than he was. Drinking, starting to fight me a little." "That's a good sign." Another pause. "Okay, keep him warm, small amounts of fluid. No solid food until he's more awake. I'll email you the dosage chart, and call Ranger Cole as soon as his line is back." "Thank you," she said, meaning more than just the medical advice. After she hung up, she finally powered on the old landline phone she kept for emergencies and left a message for the county wildlife office. Then she brewed a pot of strong coffee on the gas stove, because ER habits die hard, and sat down at the table to wait. She didn't wait long. The county truck pulled into her drive just after 9, tires crunching on the thawing ice. She watched from the window as Ranger Cole climbed out, a tall man in a green jacket and knit cap, his breath clouding in the cold. He moved with the cautious confidence of someone used to walking into other people's problems, not quite a cop, not quite a social worker, a little bit of both. Evelyn opened the door before he could knock. "Morning, Ms. Parker," he said, stamping the slush from his boots. "You left a message about a bobcat?" "Come in before we both freeze to death," she answered, "and yes, he's in here." She led him to the living room, where the wood stove still glowed and the laundry basket sat on the rug. The kitten lifted its head as they approached, pupils narrowing at the sight of a stranger. It didn't hiss ease, but its tiny body went very still. "That's him," Evelyn said quietly. "Found him beside his mother. Trap was on my property line." Cole crouched, studying the mangled trap she'd dragged up from the woods, now propped against the wall like an ugly piece of modern art. "I can make some calls about that," he said. "We've had complaints about illegal trapping in this area. But the bobcat—" He trailed off, looking back at the kitten. It met his gaze without blinking. "He's a wild animal," Cole said at last. "You know that as well as I do. Most folks would have left him there." "Most folks haven't spent 40 years looking at things that didn't have to die," Evelyn replied, a little sharper than she meant. She took a breath. Let it out. "Look, I know the rules. I called you, didn't I?" "Yeah," he said. "You did the right thing, but protocol says he goes to a licensed rehab center. They're equipped. You're not." "Have you called them?" she asked. "Have you tried in the middle of an ice storm when half the county's power is out?" He hesitated, then pulled out his phone. It took him 3 tries to get a good signal by the window. Evelyn stood beside him, arms folded, listening to his side of the conversation. "Carolina Wildlife Education Center," he said. "Yeah, this is Ranger Cole in Henderson County. I've got a bobcat kitten, orphaned, pulled out of an illegal trap. 6 to 8 weeks, female. Hypothermic, but stable now. Can you take her?" He listened, his jaw tightening. "I see," he said. "How long's your waiting list?" "That long, huh?" "All right. No, I get it. Storms hit you too." "Yeah, I'll let her know." He hung up and rubbed a hand over his face. "Well?" Evelyn prompted. "They're slammed," he said. "Overcapacity. They've got fawns stacked in dog crates and raccoons in the staff bathroom. They can't send anyone out today, and they don't want her transported until the roads are better. So she stays," Evelyn said simply. "Temporarily." He gave her a look. "They did mention one possibility. They know you up there." "I've dropped off enough injured critters," she said. "What did they say?" "They've got a program," he said. "For animals that can't be released, they sometimes place them as education ambassadors with licensed fosters. It'd mean inspections, paperwork, upgrades to your fencing, liability coverage. You'd be volunteering your house and probably half your retirement savings." He looked at her more closely. "And it's not just cute photo ops. A bobcat isn't a house pet, no matter how good your home security cameras are." Evelyn glanced at the basket. The kitten had its eyes on Cole, every muscle coiled, body wedged against the side nearest her. When she sat down on the floor beside it, it relaxed, just a fraction, leaning into her leg as if she were the only thing holding the world together. "What happens to her if I say no?" she asked. "Best case, they find a spot in a month or 2, he answered honestly. "Worst case, they don't. They're full. Budgets are tight. Euthanasia happens." The word hung in the warm air like a bad smell. Evelyn swallowed. She thought of interest rates and heating bills and rising health insurance premiums. She thought of how tired her bones felt some mornings, how much easier it would be to let someone else carry this. Then the kitten shifted again, pressing its head into her palm with surprising trust. "You said she needs a foster," Evelyn said quietly. "You're looking at one." Cole watched her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I'll start the paperwork," he said. "They'll want a home visit. Proof you understand the risks, liability forms, maybe even an umbrella policy recommendation." His mouth twitched. "You sure about this, Ms. Parker?" She stroked the kitten's head with one finger, feeling the tiny skull, the silky ears. "I picked a name for her last night," she said. "Ember, because she was the last little coal in that snowbank. I don't think you named something you're planning to give up." The kitten blinked up at her, then closed its eyes and began to purr again, louder this time. Cole shook his head, half in resignation, half in respect. "That's how it starts," he said. "Just don't forget what she is." Evelyn smiled faintly, her hand resting over the small, steady heartbeat pressed against her knee. "Oh, I know exactly what she is," she murmured. "I just don't think she's the only one in this house with claws." By the time the roads cleared enough for Tom to make it back up the hill, the storm had passed, and the world outside looked almost gentle again. The icicles hanging from the porch roof were pretty if you forgot what they'd done to the power lines. The Bobcat Kitten in the laundry basket was a little stronger every day, and Evelyn was a little more tired. Tom pushed the door open with his shoulder, arms full of grocery bags. "Evie," he called, "you alive in here, or did the ice take you out?" "I'm in the living room," she answered, "and mind your voice. We have company." He came around the corner and stopped so fast one of the bags slid down his arm. In the middle of the rug, surrounded by a ring of old towels, the spotted kitten was sitting up now, ears pricked, yellow eyes bright. Its paws were still too big for its body. It looked, for one ridiculous second, like a stuffed animal somebody had set there for decoration. Then it opened its mouth and let out a low, offended rumble. "What," Tom said slowly, "is that doing in my house?" "Her name is Ember," Evie said, "and this is her house as much as yours, at least for a while." He stared at her. "That's not a kitten. That's a wild animal." "She was," Evelyn corrected. "Now she's a wild animal who almost died on our property line because some idiot doesn't know how to follow the law. Wildlife's involved. The vet's involved. There's paperwork." "Of course there is," he muttered. "There's always paperwork." She told him about the trap, the rehab center, the foster program. Tom listened, setting the grocery bags on the counter one by one, the way he used to listen to customers in his repair shop list off strange clunks and rattles under their hoods. He didn't interrupt much. When she finished, he scrubbed a hand over his face. "You're sure you want this?" he asked quietly. "Fences, inspections, extra costs. You just finished paying off that high-interest credit card from the roof repair, remember?" She did remember. Between the raised home insurance premiums after the last storm and the slow creep of property taxes, every new project felt like taking on another little mortgage. But she also remembered the way Ember's tiny body had felt against her chest, the way those golden eyes had followed her around the room. "I'm sure," she said, "she doesn't have anyone else." Tom blew out a breath. "Then I guess, welcome to the family, Ember. Please don't eat my wife." The kitten watched him without blinking. When he took a cautious step closer, Ember stiffened, muscles bunching. Evelyn moved her hand, just enough that her fingers brushed the kitten's back. Ember relaxed a hair, leaning into her touch. Tom saw it. "Oh, I see how it is," he said. "She's already picked sides." They laughed about it then, but the line was truer than either of them knew. Weeks turned into months. The paperwork went through. Ranger Cole came out with a clipboard and a checklist. Evelyn and Tom spent 2 weekends sinking fence posts in the half-frozen yard, stretching heavy-gauge wire, adding a covered run off the back porch so Ember could have some fresh air without tempting fate. Every receipt made Evelyn's stomach tighten: lumber, hardware, specialized locks. But when she sat at the kitchen table with her coffee and her stack of bills, telling herself the usual things about retirement planning and keeping a little aside for emergencies, Ember would pad into the room, hop onto the bench beside her, and put one heavy paw on her thigh, like she was reminding Evie what important really meant. Ember grew. The spots along her sides darkened. Her legs lengthened into clean, powerful lines. The first time she leapt from the floor to the top of the refrigerator in one smooth motion, Tom nearly dropped the jar of peanut butter. "That's not natural," he said faintly. "She's a bobcat, not a house cat," Evelyn reminded him. "And she lives here because of a very specific set of unnatural circumstances." Despite the jokes, they fell into a rhythm. Evie fed Ember on a strict schedule, kept a notebook on the counter with weights and notes the way some folks tracked stock prices. Cole stopped by once a month to check the enclosure. Dr. Patel came for vaccinations and went away shaking his head, muttering, "You always did pick the hardest way to do things, Evelyn." Through it all, Ember attached herself to Evelyn with a focus that would have been flattering if it hadn't been so intense. Wherever Evie went, Ember followed, nails clicking softly on the hardwood. If Evelyn sat, Ember found a way to lean against her body, on her feet, across her knees, shoulder pressed to her hip. With Tom, it was different. He tried. He really did. He offered Ember treats, spoke to her in the same calm tone he'd used with skittish dogs in the shop. Sometimes she'd take the food, sometimes she'd stare at him until he set it down and backed away. She never swatted, never lunged, but there was a line in the room Tom couldn't quite cross, a tension that crackled when he got too close to Evelyn. The first time it showed itself plain was on an ordinary Tuesday evening. Evelyn was at the stove, stirring a pot of soup. The day's mail lay scattered on the table behind her. Medicare statements, a glossy brochure about life insurance she didn't need, another reminder from the bank about checking her credit score. Ember lay stretched along the rug, eyes half closed, tail flicking lazily. Tom came up behind her, slid his arms around her waist, and rested his chin on her shoulder. "Smells good," he murmured. "You know, some guys my age are eating canned ravioli in front of the TV, and here I am with homemade soup. I married up." She smiled and leaned back into him, just for a second. That was when Ember moved. There was no warning hiss, no yowl. One moment she was on the floor, the next she was between them, a blur of muscle and spotted fur. Her body slammed lightly against Evelyn's legs, pushing her a step forward, away from Tom. A low, serious growl rolled out of her chest, deeper than any sound Evie had heard from her before. Tom froze, hands lifting off Evelyn's waist on instinct. Ember's ears were half back, eyes locked on him, whiskers flared. She wasn't baring her teeth, not quite, but every line of her body said, "Mine." "Easy," Evelyn said softly, heart thudding. "Ember, it's just Tom." Ember glanced up at her, then back at him. The growl lowered but didn't stop. Tom slowly took a step back, palms open. "Okay," he said. "Message received." As soon as he moved away, Ember's body loosened. She backed up until her haunches touched Evelyn's legs, sitting there like a furry little security guard. The growl faded to silence, but she stayed, watching him with bright, unblinking eyes. For a long moment the three of them stood there in the kitchen, the soup bubbling quietly on the stove, the refrigerator humming, the world balanced on some line none of them had known was there until Ember drew it. Then Tom huffed out a breath. "Well," he said, aiming for lightness and almost getting there. At least now we know who's really in charge." That night, when they went to bed, Ember curled up on Evelyn's side of the mattress and fixed Tom with that same narrow-eyed stare until he rolled over and gave them both some extra space. It might have stayed a joke if it had only happened once, but in the weeks that followed, a pattern emerged. Pastor Helen dropped by with a casserole and, as church ladies do, reached up to squeeze Evelyn's shoulder. Ember appeared from under the table, slid between them, and gave the pastor a look that would have made a deacon rethink his life. Mia from next door came over to help tag donations for the shop, laughing at a sequined jacket from 1983. When she impulsively hugged Evelyn from the side, delighted at some old record. They found Ember's head snapped up. She put one paw on Evelyn's knee and another on Mia's arm, eyes wide, as if to say, "Let's not get carried away here." Even Ranger Cole wasn't immune. He touched Evelyn's elbow one afternoon to steady her on the icy back step, and Ember, who had been pretending to nap by the door, sat up and rumbled a quiet warning. Cole pulled his hand back, eyebrows raised. "She's dedicated," he said diplomatically. Evelyn laughed it off most of the time. "She thinks I'm the last heat lamp on earth," she joked, "or the last chicken in the yard." But late at night, when the house creaked and Tom's slow breathing filled the dark, she'd feel that heavy, warm weight pressed against her legs and wonder just how far Ember's idea of protection went. The answer came on the day Tom almost fell. It was nothing dramatic at first. He was coming down the stairs with a box of winter clothes in his arms, muttering about needing to clear space in the closet. His sock slipped on the smooth wood, just enough that his heel shot out from under him. The box lurched. His foot slid toward the edge of the step. Evelyn, standing at the bottom with a basket of thrift shop linens, looked up in time to see his eyes go wide. Before she could move, Ember launched herself from the hallway rug. She hit the bottom step with all 4 feet, tail fluffed, body coiled. As Tom's weight pitched forward, she rose up on her hind legs, front paws outstretched, and smacked into his shins with surprising force. Not enough to knock him down, but enough to jolt him backward just a hair, enough to make him grab the banister instead of air. The box thumped against his chest. One shirt flew out and landed on Ember's head. She shook it off, dropped back to all fours, and stood there panting, eyes huge. Tom clung to the railing, breathing hard. "Well," he said finally, "that could have been my hip." Evelyn set the laundry basket down, knees weak. Ember looked from one of them to the other, then padded over to Evelyn and leaned against her leg, as if confirming where her priorities lay. Tom watched her, then met Evelyn's eyes over the Bobcat's spotted back. There was something new in his expression, a mix of gratitude and unease. "She pushed me," he said slowly, "or caught me, or something, I don't know. But if I'd gone down those stairs, I'd be calling about long-term care insurance instead of arguing with a cat." Evelyn rested her hand on Ember's head, feeling the tremor still running through her muscles. "She's not just jealous," he added quietly. "She's watching everything." "Yes," Evelyn said, her palm moving gently over Ember's fur. "She is." And for the first time, the thought that slid through her mind wasn't just that Ember might keep people away. It was that Ember might one day be the reason she was still standing when something much worse than a slip step came for her. It didn't take long for the hill to start talking. At first, it was little things. The mail started coming with a faint rattle instead of a solid thunk, because Jorge, the mailman, had learned to let the metal lid of the box drop from a distance, rather than reach all the way in. Ember sat in the front window every afternoon, like a furry gargoyle, watching the road. The first time Jorge saw her, he almost dropped Mrs. Whitfield's gardening catalog in a puddle. "Senora Parker," he called one day when Evelyn opened the door to wave at him, "that is not a cat. She's a bobcat," Evelyn agreed. Ember stood beside her, shoulder brushed against Evie's leg, yellow eyes fixed on the uniformed stranger. "And she's behind glass. You're safe." Jorge squinted at Ember, then at Evelyn. "I've been bitten by chihuahuas with worse attitudes," he said, "but I'm going to start putting your packages on the porch and knocking from way back there, okay?" "That's fine," she said, amused. "Just don't run. She thinks running is a game." "Good to know," he muttered, retreating. "You need anything, you call me. My cousin sells good home insurance, too, just in case she chews through that window." He was joking mostly. Still, the story grew legs. By the time it reached the bottom of the hill, Evelyn supposedly had a full-grown cougar tied to her porch with a chain. The kids on Ridge Road loved it. "Grandma Evie has a mountain lion," Noah whispered to his little sister on the way up the drive one Saturday. "Dad says I gotta be careful, but he promised to take a video if she eats my shoe." Lily clutched her stuffed rabbit tighter. "I don't want my shoe eaten." Tom met them in the yard. "Relax," he said, ruffling Noah's hair. "She's not a mountain lion, and she's not going to eat anybody's shoe. She just thinks your grandma is made out of solid gold." Inside, Ember paced when she heard the voices. She'd learned the sound of their car, the particular rhythm of Tom's knock, the way Lily squealed, "Grandma Evie!" Like every reunion was a miracle. Her tail twitched with every step. Evelyn opened the door a crack. Ember slid into the space, pressing her nose to the screen, whiskers quivering. She saw two small shapes barreling toward the porch and went very still. "Wait on the steps," Evie called. "One at a time. You know the rules." Noah skidded to a stop, sneakers scraping. "Can we pet her this time?" he asked, bouncing on his toes. "We'll see," Evelyn said. "Come up slow." He climbed the last two steps carefully, hand on the rail, like she'd taught him. Lily followed, sticking close. When Evelyn stepped out, Ember kept herself between her and the children, eyes darting from one face to the other. "It's okay," Evie murmured to the bobcat. "These are our babies." Noah extended a hand the way Ranger Cole had shown him when he visited for Yi. Thanksgiving, knuckles down, fingers curled, no sudden moves. Ember sniffed, whiskers brushing his skin. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then she huffed, almost a sigh, and sat, one big paw landing on Evelyn's boot. "That's as good as you're going to get," Tom said from the doorway. "Come on, let your grandma breathe." Once they were all inside, the tension eased. Ember stalked around the coffee table, pretended not to care, then finally flopped on the rug with her back to the couch where Evelyn sat. Lily plucked up the courage to touch the tip of Ember's tail when it swished by. Ember flicked it once and ignored her. "See," Noah said proudly, "she likes us." "She tolerates you," Tom corrected. "That's different." Not everyone on the hill found the new arrangement entertaining. A week after the kids' visit, Evelyn found Mrs. Whitfield frozen on the front walk, hands clamped around a casserole dish. Ember was lying in the bay window behind Evelyn, half hidden by the curtain, eyes narrowed. "I didn't know you were keeping that thing," Mrs. Whitfield said, her gaze never leaving the bobcat's face. "She has a name," Evelyn replied, taking the casserole. "Ember, and she's legally here. Wildlife has all the paperwork." "I just worry, dear," Mrs. Whitfield said. She was in her 70s, hair set once a week in town, the kind of woman who put seasonal flags in her flower beds and knew everyone's business. "What if a child wanders up? What if she gets out? We all pay good money for this neighborhood. Property values matter. You know how hard it is now with mortgage rates and taxes and the price of everything." "I do know," Evelyn said evenly. There were nights she lay awake thinking about property taxes and health insurance and the rising cost of groceries. "I also know she's not the only risk up here. There are bears, coyotes. A drunk teenager with a pickup is more likely to hurt somebody than she is. Mrs. Whitfield pursed her lips. Well, I just hope you've talked to a lawyer and checked your liability coverage. If anything happens, the HOA will have to get involved. Evelyn felt Ember shift behind the glass, felt the familiar weight of that yellow stare on the back of her neck. She forced a smile. I appreciate your concern, she said. I'll make sure everything's in order. Mrs. Whitfield left with tight goodbyes. Later that afternoon, Evelyn saw her standing at the bottom of the hill talking to another neighbor, both of them glancing up toward the house between sentences. The next new presence on the hill arrived in the form of a skinny teenage girl in an oversized hoodie. Evelyn first saw her hovering at the edge of the thrift shop, pretending to look at a shelf of old cookbooks, while her eyes kept sliding toward the back door where Ember's enclosure attached to the porch. Can I help you find something? Evelyn asked, wiping her hands on her apron. The girl jumped. No, ma'am. I heard you had a bobcat. Her accent was local, but softer than Noah's, with the shy edges of someone who'd learned early not to take up too much space. Do you like animals? Evelyn asked. Yes, ma'am, the girl said. My mom works nights. We can't have pets in our rental. I'm Mia. I live 3 houses down, in the brown duplex. Evelyn had seen her before, walking home from the bus stop with earbuds in, head down. Well, Mia, she said, Ember's not a pet exactly, but she could use another pair of eyes sometimes. You any good at scooping litter and rinsing food bowls? Mia's face lit up in a way Evelyn hadn't seen on a teenager in a long time. Yes, ma'am, she said. I can do that. I help at the shelter in town when I can get a ride. Evelyn started her on small chores, paying her a few dollars an hour under the table, grateful she could manage that even with her fixed income and credit card bill nipping at the edges. The first time Mia stepped onto the porch, Ember froze, then slipped behind Evelyn's leg, peering around at the new human with obvious interest. It's okay, girl, Evelyn murmured. She's with us. Mia crouched, keeping her hands on her knees, not reaching out. Hey there, she said softly. You're even prettier up close. For a long moment Ember stared. Then, to Evelyn's surprise, the bobcat padded forward and sniffed Mia's shoe. A second later, her cheek brushed lightly against the girl's shin. Well, I'll be, Evelyn muttered. Word spread again, as it does in small places. The strange cat would growl at the mailman, the pastor, half the neighborhood, but she'd accept a shy teenager with calloused hands and a bus pass. Not all the talk was kind. 2 weeks after Mia started coming regularly, an official-looking envelope appeared in Evelyn's mailbox, right behind the electric bill. The return address read, Ridge Road Homeowners Association. Her stomach tightened before she even opened it. The letter was polite, in the way threatening things often are. Concern had been expressed, it said, about the presence of a wild animal on the property. Questions had been raised about safety, liability, and the association's legal obligations. There would be a special meeting on the first Tuesday of next month to discuss the matter and consider appropriate action. At the bottom, in small neat cursive, was a note. Evelyn, I truly hope we can resolve this amicably. Marjorie Whitfield. Evelyn stood in the kitchen, the letter in one hand, Ember's warm fur under the other. The bobcat was pressed against her hip, as usual, as if the two of them were welded together. Outside, the hill looked peaceful. Ice melted, birds back at the feeder, Jorge's truck puttering down the road. The neighborhood was whispering. Soon it would be speaking out loud. And Ember, who didn't understand, letters or meetings or HOA bylaws, would answer the only way she knew how whenever anyone came too close. Evelyn folded the letter carefully and slipped it into the drawer where she kept warranties, tax receipts, and the policy from her modest life insurance. Then she rested her hand on Ember's head and whispered, Looks like it's you and me against the world again, girl. Ember's only reply was a low, steady rumble aimed at the driveway where a car had just pulled in, and another set of footsteps began the climb up her hill. The special HOA meeting was still a week away when everything changed. It was a Tuesday, the kind of ordinary day you never expect to remember. Evelyn spent the morning sorting donations in the thrift shop, the afternoon on the phone with Medicare about a confusing statement, then an hour balancing her checkbook and wondering, not for the first time, whether she should look into a cheaper home insurance policy or even a small mortgage refinance to lower the monthly payment. The world felt tight around the edges, but familiar. By evening, the sky had gone that soft blue that comes just before dark. Tom watched the local news in his recliner, half dozing, while Ember lay stretched along the hallway, exactly where she could see both the living room and the door to the thrift shop. Evelyn locked the front door, checked that the side door was bolted, and flipped the sign in the shop window to "closed out of habit," even though it was dark enough that nobody could read it. "Don't stay up too late," she told Tom, kissing the top of his head. "I'm going to take a hot bath and pretend I'm 25 again." "Take your time," he said. "If you hear me yelling, it's just the quarterback doing something stupid." Ember's ear flicked at his voice. But she didn't move. The bath was hot enough to make her sigh out loud. Evelyn let the water soak into her sore shoulders. Let herself imagine, for just a moment, what life would be like in some glossy financial commercial. Everything planned, life insurance paid up, a retirement account big enough to cover travel instead of co-pays. It felt like a different planet. On this one, there were creaky knees, storm damage, and a bobcat who thought she was a body to be guarded at all costs. She must have dozed off for a few minutes, because the next sound came like something out of a dream. A muffled thump from the direction of the shop, followed by a faint, unfamiliar rattle. Her eyes snapped open. For a second she lay still, listening. The house made its usual ticking noises, the fan hummed. Then she heard it again, glass, maybe, or metal against metal. Not the refrigerator, not the heat pump. Before she could sit up, Ember's voice tore through the quiet. It was not the low, warning rumble Evelyn had gotten used to. This was a full-throated roar, a sound that started somewhere deep in the animal's chest and shook the walls as it came out. There was a sharp thud, claws on wood, something heavy skidding. "Tom?" Evelyn called, heart racing. "Tom, what was that?" Tom's answer was not words so much as a shout, followed by a curse and the crash of his recliner snapping upright. She was out of the tub in a heartbeat, grabbing a towel and wrapping it around herself as she scrambled for her robe. Her slippers slipped on the bathroom tile. She caught herself on the doorframe and stumbled into the hall, still tying the belt with shaking fingers. The living room was empty. The TV was still on, some commercial about a low-interest credit card running with the volume down. The front door was closed, deadbolt gleaming. The noise came again, this time clearly from the thrift shop. Shelves rattling, something falling, Ember's wild snarl layered over a human shout that sounded like pure panic. "Tom!" she cried. "Stay back!" He yelled from somewhere beyond the shop door. "Evie, stay where you are! Call 911!" Evelyn grabbed the cordless phone from its base with one hand and the baseball bat they kept by the umbrella stand with the other. Her fingers punched 911 from memory. As the dispatcher answered, she moved toward the door that connected the house to the shop. "Ma'am, what's your emergency?" the voice in her ear asked. "There's someone in my store," Evelyn said, trying to keep her voice steady. "My husband's in there. And my bobcat. It sounds bad." She could hear the dispatcher asking for her address, whether the intruder had a weapon, how long it had been going on. In the background, Ember's snarls rose and fell, mixed with the crash of something metal hitting the floor and the unmistakable, high, terrified sound of a grown man losing his nerve. Evelyn reached the connecting door and pressed her ear against it. Ember's body hit the other side with a dull thump, claws scraping, as if she'd thrown herself between the intruder and this last line to the house. "Officers are on the way," the dispatcher said. "Stay in a safe place, ma'am. Do not go in there." She did as she was told, for once in her life, backing away from the door, bat still raised. Her heart pounded in her throat. Tom's voice came again, closer now, rough with adrenaline. "Get out!" he shouted. "I said get out!" There was a pounding of feet, then a slam as the back door burst open. Cold air swept under the connecting door. Ember's snarls followed the fleeing footsteps down the alley, fading as the intruder's shoes slapped wildly against the pavement. Then silence. Evelyn stood there, dripping water onto the hardwood, clutching the phone and the bat and breathing like she'd run a mile. Her chest ached. For a brief, strange moment she thought about her last life insurance statement and wondered if the underwriter had any idea what kind of nonsense went on in this house. "Ma'am?" the dispatcher said. "Ma'am, are you still with me?" "I'm here," she managed. I think they're gone." The patrol cars arrived fast, lights washing the yard in red and blue. Jorge, who lived 2 streets over, later swore he'd never driven his delivery route that fast in his life. He heard the sirens and stepped out onto his porch, already pulling out his phone to see if it was Evie's place. The officers cleared the thrift shop first. Glass from a broken display case crunched under their boots. One shelf of costume jewelry lay on its side, necklaces and earrings scattered like spilled candy. The back door hung open, its lock splintered. In the middle of the mess stood Ember. Her fur was fluffed to twice its normal size, tail bottle-brushed, ears flat. She planted herself between the officers and the connecting door, body low, lips peeled just enough to show teeth. Her eyes burned in the harsh beam of their flashlights. "Easy there, girl," one of the officers murmured. "We're the good guys." "Ember," Evelyn called softly from the house side, where Tom had finally convinced her to stay. "It's all right. Let them in." The bobcat's ears flicked at her voice. Slowly, the muscles along her back loosened. She stepped backward until her haunches bumped the door, then turned her head and bumped it with her forehead like she was checking if Evelyn was still there. Tom touched Evelyn's shoulder. "Security system did its job," he said, nodding toward the small camera in the corner. "So did she." It turned out the camera had caught everything. The grainy footage showed a man in a hooded jacket prying the back door open, slipping inside, and heading straight for the locked cash box behind the counter. It showed him jerking around at the first low growl, eyes huge, just as Ember stepped out of the shadows like something from a nature documentary, all muscle and intent. The rest was almost comical, in a heart-stopping way. The intruder scrambling backward, slipping on a pile of donated shoes. Ember advancing in short, threatening lunges that stopped just shy of contact, driving him toward the door like a border collie pushing sheep. When he finally bolted, she chased him all the way to the threshold, stopping only when his body disappeared into the dark. "I've seen police dogs do less," one of the officers said, replaying the video on Evelyn's old laptop. "If this isn't justifiable defense of property, I don't know what is." They made a report, promised to circulate the footage, and suggested she might want to upgrade the locks. Tom mentioned, wryly, that they'd already been talking about adding another home security camera to cover the back door. The officer nodded and said modern systems were cheaper than most people thought, especially compared to the price of replacing stolen inventory. By morning, the story had spread beyond the hill. It started when Jorge asked, as casually as he could, if he could see the video just once. Then he showed it to his cousin at the diner, who showed it to a customer who happened to work at the local TV station. By lunchtime, a reporter named Lisa was standing in front of the thrift shop with a cameraman, asking Evelyn if she'd mind talking for a quick human interest segment. "I don't feel very interesting," Evelyn said. "I feel tired." "You survived a break-in because of a rescued bobcat," Lisa said gently. "That's the kind of story people need right now, with everything so expensive and scary. It reminds folks that not everything is about money and credit scores." Tom, standing in the background with his arms crossed, muttered, "Tell that to our deductible." Still, they agreed. The camera rolled. Lisa asked about the storm, the trap, the foster program. She asked how it felt to know a wild animal had defended her home more effectively than any alarm. Evelyn looked at Ember, sitting behind the glass door, pressed as close as she could get without triggering another neighborhood panic. "It feels like I made one good decision," she said simply. "In a world where most of us are just trying to keep up with property taxes and prescription costs, it feels good to know there's someone watching over me who doesn't care one bit about interest rates." The segment aired on the evening news. The clip of Ember driving the intruder out of the shop played 3 times. Viewers called the station. Someone posted it online, where it started to pick up more views than any budget speech or insurance commercial. Up in Raleigh, at the State Wildlife Office, a staffer scrolling through her feed frowned, replayed the video, and forwarded it to her supervisor with a note. "Is this one of ours? Foster bobcat in Henderson County? We should probably follow up." On Ridge Road, the neighbors watched the same clip on their televisions. Some shook their heads, muttering about danger and lawsuits. Others nodded, impressed in spite of themselves. And in the little house on the hill, Evelyn went to bed that night with her front door double-checked, her home security camera light still blinking, and 30 pounds of spotted muscle curled along her legs, rumbling quietly at every car that passed too close to her drive. They set the hearing for a Tuesday morning because that's when most people with jobs couldn't show up. Evelyn knew how it worked. She'd watched enough town meetings over the years to understand that the folks who made the schedules were not the same folks stocking shelves on the night shift or answering phones at the clinic. Still, she ironed her one good blazer, dug out a necklace that didn't look like it came from the thrift shop, and got up earlier than she had for anything since her last 6 a.m. staff meeting, back when she still wore hospital scrubs. Tom drove. Ember rode in the back of the SUV in a heavy-duty travel crate, eyes bright, tail flicking. Regulations said she couldn't go into the meeting room, but Evelyn refused to leave her home alone with the neighborhood buzzing. The compromise was the hallway outside the council chambers, where Ranger Cole promised to keep an eye on her. "Just talk slow," Tom said as they pulled into the town hall lot. "Breathe. They're just people." "They're people who can take my cat," Evelyn said. "I've seen kinder faces on bill collectors." He reached over and squeezed her hand. "You've got more backup than most folks walking into something like this," he reminded her. "You've got that news story, and the video, and half the hill. That's more than a lot of people have when the bank calls about their mortgage." Inside, the council chambers smelled like coffee and old wood polish. A row of officials sat behind a long table, 2 from the State Wildlife Office, a county attorney, a representative from the HOA, and a man Evelyn recognized from the local paper. In the audience, scattered across the folding chairs, were familiar faces. Jorge in his postal jacket, Mia in a too-big thrift store blouse, Pastor Helen with her Bible tucked under one arm, EMT Jake in a navy polo with the county logo. Mrs. Whitfield sat in the front row, back very straight, a folder of printed notes in her lap. The wildlife officer called the meeting to order, listing case numbers and statutes. He used phrases like public safety and wildlife management and liability exposure. Evelyn listened, hands folded tightly in her lap, feeling every year in her bones. They showed the video of the break-in again, projected on a portable screen. The room leaned forward as Ember padded out of the shadows, driving the intruder backward. Someone let out a low whistle when the man slipped on the pile of shoes and nearly fell. "That's better than any home security system I've seen in our price range," Jorge said under his breath, earning a few nervous chuckles. Then it was time for public comment. Mrs. Whitfield went first. She spoke about property values and grandchildren and the fear of living next to a predator. She mentioned homeowners insurance, how one accident could ruin more than just privacy. It could take someone's retirement savings and leave them drowning in credit card debt. She said it all politely, with the faint, brittle edge of someone who honestly did worry, even if she also liked having something to complain about. When it was his turn, Jorge talked about how he'd never seen Ember lunge or snap, just watch and rumble. Pastor Helen told them how Ember would appear in the window every time she came to drop off a casserole, like a furry usher making sure Evelyn wasn't alone. Mia's voice shook as she described cleaning the enclosure, how Ember let her touch that thick, dangerous fur without so much as a flinch. "She looks scary on camera," Mia said, "but to me she's steady, like she's holding the house together." EMT Jake cleared his throat. "I wasn't called here for that break-in," he said. "That night, I was the guy on the other end of the 911 line. I heard the noise. I saw the video later. But I've been to Ms. Parker's house on another call, and what I saw then, that's the one that sticks with me." He glanced at Evelyn, asking permission with his eyes. She nodded. "I responded to a medical call 2 months after the break-in," he said. "Miss Parker was lightheaded, near fainting. By the time I got there, she was sitting on the floor instead of lying at the bottom of her stairs. She told me the bobcat pushed against her legs and wouldn't stop until she sat down. Her blood pressure was in the basement. If she'd fallen and hit her head, we might be talking about long-term care instead of a wildlife hearing." He let that sit there. "So yeah, she's a risk," he finished. "No question, but she's also, in my professional opinion, already prevented one emergency from turning into a tragedy." When they called Evelyn up, her knees felt wobbly. She took a deep breath like she'd done before, giving hard news to patients, and stepped to the microphone. She talked about the storm, the trap, the moment she chose to pick up that freezing bundle instead of walking away. She talked about the forms, the inspections, the fencing they'd paid for on a fixed income, the way Ember sat up nights after the break-in, like a soldier on watch. "I know she's not a golden retriever," Evelyn said, looking each official in the eye. "I know there are risks, but I also know what she is to me. I live alone on that hill most days. My husband's here, my neighbors are here, but when the bills come and the power goes out and the news talks about rising premiums and who can't afford medication, the only heartbeat I can hear in this house at night is mine and hers. She's not a pet. She's my guardian." Her voice caught on the last word. She felt her heart give a funny, fluttering kick. It had been doing that more lately, little skips, pauses that made her catch her breath. Her doctor had mentioned stress, maybe adjusting her medication, checking her Medicare plan to make sure her prescriptions didn't suddenly jump in cost. She'd promised to call. She hadn't yet. "Thank you, Ms. Parker," the chair said. "You can sit down now." She turned from the microphone. The room swayed for just a moment, the faces blurring. She put a hand on the back of a chair to steady herself and told herself it was just nerves. In the hallway, beyond the closed double doors, Ember must have felt something change. The first growl came faint, muffled by wood and distance. Heads turned. The second was louder, a low, rippling thunder that vibrated through the floor. There was a scratching sound, claws on tile, then a sharp, insistent thump. Jake was on his feet before he knew he had moved. "That's not her usual," he said, already moving toward the doors. Evelyn took a step after him, and the room tilted hard. Her vision tunneled. The fluorescent lights overhead became white streaks. She heard someone say her name. Her knees gave. "Evie!" Tom shouted, catching her under one arm as she sagged. The chair she'd been holding slid away. The microphone squealed feedback that made everyone wince. Out in the hall, Ember went from growl to full frantic snarling, hurling her body against the crate door. The metal rattled, the sound sharp and urgent. Ranger Cole grabbed the handle to keep the crate from tipping. "Something's wrong," he said, and for once he didn't mean with the Bobcat. Jake reached Evelyn just as her legs started to fold. "I've got you," he said, easing her down to sit instead of letting her hit the floor. "Ms. Parker, can you hear me? Stay with me." Her heart fluttered again, a strange, hollow feeling in her chest. She focused on Jake's face, the calm, professional tone she knew so well from the other side of these moments. "I'm fine," she tried, but the word came out slurred. "No, you're not," Jake said. "Tom, lift her feet. Somebody call to an ambulance. And clear some space, please." Voices rose. Chairs scraped. Out in the hall, Ember's snarls peaked, then dropped into a keening sound Evelyn had never heard from her before. "Is that the animal?" the wildlife officer asked, half standing. "That's the animal telling you this woman is in trouble," Jake snapped, all politeness gone. If she'd been home alone, that sound might be the only reason anybody came in time. "Now step back and let me work." He checked her pulse, her blood pressure, the rhythm under his fingertips. He muttered something about arrhythmia, about getting her on a monitor, about how quickly stress and a little dehydration could tip someone her age into dangerous territory. The ambulance came fast, siren echoing off the brick buildings downtown. They loaded her carefully, Tom climbing in beside her, his face pale and scared. As they shut the doors, Evelyn caught a glimpse of Ember through the glass entryway, pressed up against the front of her crate, eyes locked on the flashing lights, her mouth still moving in silent protest. At the hospital, tests and monitors and needles blurred into the familiar dance Evelyn had once directed from the other side of the bed. This time she was the one lying under the bright lights, listening to strangers talk about medication adjustments and follow-up appointments, and how stress wasn't good for a heart that had already done more work than most. "You're lucky," one doctor said gently. "If you'd gone down hard when you got lightheaded, we might be talking about rehab or long-term care instead of sending you home in a day or two." "Luck had orange spots and a bad attitude," Evelyn murmured, and the doctor laughed, not quite sure if she was joking. Back at the town hall, the hearing reconvened in a subdued mood. Jake spoke again, this time with fresh authority. "You all heard that Bobcat," he said, nodding toward the hallway where Ember's crate had been. "She reacted before most of us even saw Ms. Parker sway. I'm not saying she's a medical device, but I am saying, if you're going to weigh risk and benefit here, you have to count that." In the end, the board did what boards do. They compromised. Evelyn would be allowed to keep Ember as an educational ambassador under stricter conditions. The enclosure would have to be upgraded to sanctuary standards. There would be surprise inspections, mandatory signage, increased liability coverage. Ember would have to wear a harness and muzzle any time she left the property for programs. One serious incident, one violation, and the permit would be revoked. The HOA representative, eyeing the paperwork, reluctantly agreed that as long as the state sanctioned the arrangement, the association would suspend any action, for now. When Tom brought Evelyn home 2 days later, tired but upright, Ember met them at the door with a sound that was almost a sob. She rubbed against Evelyn's leg so hard it nearly knocked her into Tom. "I'm all right," Evelyn whispered, dropping a hand to that familiar, solid head. "You did good, girl. You did real good." Tom watched them, one arm ready in case she swayed again. Later, as he sat at the table with a stack of forms about health insurance, follow-up care, and the upgraded enclosure costs, he looked over at Ember, sprawled across Evelyn's feet, and shook his head. "I used to think a home security system was something you bought in an electronics store," he said. Turns out, sometimes it has whiskers. Evelyn smiled faintly, fingers resting in Ember's fur. For the first time in days, her heart felt steady. Sometimes, she agreed, it growls whenever anyone comes too close. The years slipped by the way they always do, slow while you're living them, fast when you look back. One winter morning, Evelyn woke up and realized Ember wasn't leaping onto the bed anymore. She was climbing, carefully, claws hooking into the quilt, breathing a little harder when she finally settled against Evelyn's legs. The spots along her sides were the same, but the fur around her muzzle had gone pale, dusted with silver the way Tom's hair had. "Join the club," Evelyn murmured, running her fingers along that familiar jawline. "We're all going gray around here." Mia graduated high school and started a vet tech program in town, juggling classes and a weekend shift at Dr. Patel's clinic. Noah shot up 6 inches practically overnight, voice cracking, talking about trade school and used trucks. Lily turned into a quiet, sharp-eyed girl who read mystery novels in the thrift shop between customers and still slipped Ember her crusts when she thought no one was looking. The house changed in smaller ways. There were more pill bottles in the kitchen cabinet, some for Evelyn, some for Ember. The folder in the desk drawer with the mortgage papers and the home insurance policy grew fatter with test results and instructions from specialists. Evelyn joked that if she stacked all the paperwork from the health insurance company in one pile, she could use it as a step stool. Every evening, as long as the weather allowed, she and Ember ended up in the same place, on the back porch, facing the Blue Ridge. It started as a way to calm her nerves after doctor visits. The cardiologist had adjusted her medications again, talking about atrial fibrillation and stroke risk, about how Medicare would cover some things and not others. It was a lot to take in for someone who'd spent a career giving advice, not receiving it. Out on the porch, with the sky turning orange and purple over the dark line of trees, it was easier to breathe. Ember would follow her out, slower now, shoulders rolling with the stiffness in her hips. Evelyn would settle into the old rocker, and the Bobcat would lower herself onto the weathered boards with a soft grunt, always close enough that their bodies touched. Together they watched the light fade, the shadows creep up the hill, the first stars appear. "Not a bad retirement plan," Evelyn told her one evening, patting the arm of the chair. "Could have done worse." Ember blinked at her, unamused, and laid her head on her paws. The change, when it came, was small enough that if Evelyn hadn't known every inch of that animal, she might have missed it. Ember started drinking more water. She left a little food in her bowl, which she had never done in her life. Her breath took on a faint ammonia smell that made alarms ring in Evelyn's nurse brain before she could put words to it. Mia noticed too. "I don't like this," Mia said quietly one afternoon, kneeling beside Ember while she lay in her favorite patch of sun. "Her gums are pale, and she's dropped weight since the last time I measured." They took her in to see Dr. Patel. The clinic smelled the same as always, disinfectant and dog breath and coffee, but everything about the visit felt heavier. Blood work, gentle hands holding Ember still, the soft click of the centrifuge, the quiet in the exam room while they waited. When Dr. Patel came back with the results, he didn't bother with a lot of medical jargon. "Chronic kidney disease," he said, eyes kind behind his glasses. "Pretty advanced. We can make her comfortable for a while. Fluids, diet changes, medication. But this isn't something we can fix, Evelyn. We're talking months, not years." Evelyn let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "How long?" she asked. He shook his head. "Hard to say. You'll know when she's tired of fighting. You've seen enough of this to recognize the line." She had. She'd walked too many families up to that line and held their hands when they crossed it. On the drive home, the silence in the SUV felt different than the silences. after hearings or cardiology appointments. Ember lay on the blanket in the back, head down, eyes half closed, the way an old soldier might ride home from a last tour. That night on the porch, the sunset was almost too beautiful. Gold poured along the ridge, clouds lit from underneath like coals. Evelyn sat with one hand buried in Ember's fur and felt the roughness of the bobcat's breaths, the way her chest rose and fell with slow, deliberate effort. "You've been on duty a long time," Evelyn whispered, "longer than anybody had a right to expect." Ember didn't answer, but after a moment she shifted, leaning more of her weight against Evelyn's leg as if to say, "Not yet." They bought time. Mia came every day with bags of prescription food and IV fluids, learning to slip the needle under Ember's skin with a tenderness that made Evelyn's throat tighten. Ranger Cole dropped off extra straw for the enclosure, though Ember spent most of her time inside now. Jorge brought deli meat for the sick lady and pretended not to notice when some of it ended up in the bobcat's bowl. Even Mrs. Whitfield changed in her way. One afternoon, she stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, clutching a Tupperware of chicken salad. "I heard she wasn't doing well," she said stiffly. "Whatever, disagreements we've had, I never wanted the animal to suffer." Evelyn shrugged, too tired for old arguments. "She's had a good run," she said, "better than most of the wild ones get." Then came the day when both of them knew. Ember didn't get up for breakfast. She lifted her head when Evelyn came into the room, eyes still bright, but made no move to stand. When Evelyn slid her hands under the bobcat's chest to help, Ember went along for a step or two, then sank gently back down, sides heaving. "All right," Evelyn said softly. "All right. You've told me." She made 2 phone calls, one to Dr. Patel, one to Pastor Helen. She texted Mia and Tom, and Mia passed the word to Noah, Lily, Jorge, and even Mrs. Whitfield. It felt a little like those phone trees after a death, only this time the person in question was still breathing, still in the room, still watching them with calm, gold eyes. "I can come to you," Dr. Patel said. "She deserves to go on that porch of hers." When the time came, the porch was as full as Evelyn had ever seen it. Tom stood behind her chair with both hands on her shoulders. Mia sat cross-legged on the floorboards near Ember's head, one hand resting lightly on the bobcat's cheek. Noah and Lily leaned against the railing, faces pale and scared in the late afternoon light. Jorge was there, hat in his hands. Pastor Helen stood a little to the side, lips moving silently. Even Mrs. Whitfield hovered in the doorway, eyes shiny, hands knotted together. Ranger Cole leaned against a porch post, eyes fixed on the tree line like he was standing a watch of his own. Dr. Patel knelt beside Ember with his little tray of syringes. He explained each one out of habit, though everyone already knew. "This first one will help her relax," he said. "She may get a little heavy-eyed. The second, that's the one that lets her go. It will be peaceful." Evelyn nodded. Her hand never left Ember's fur. She could feel the faint purr vibrating under her fingers, shaky but there. "Take your time," she whispered into one tufted ear. "We're not in a hurry." The sedative went in quickly. Ember's breathing slowed. Her muscles unclenched. For the first time in months, the tightness around her eyes eased. Evelyn could almost imagine they were back at the beginning again, on that first winter night, a tiny body wrapped in a coat against her chest. "You remember that," she murmured. "You remember the ice and the trap and all the terrible choices I made after it." Ember's tail twitched once, the movement small but sure. Her head pressed a fraction harder into Evelyn's palm. Dr. Patel met Evelyn's gaze, asking without words. She swallowed. "Do it," she said, "before I change my mind." The second injection was quick. The effect was not dramatic. Ember's purr faded to a faint hum, then to nothing. Her breath slowed further, long spaces opening between each inhale. Somewhere beyond the trees a dog barked. A car rolled past on the road below, somebody's radio playing an old song. Evelyn's thumb traced small circles in the thinning fur. "You've done your job," she whispered. "You've guarded me from break-ins and bad days, and maybe worse. You can stand down now, girl. I'll be okay." For a moment, Ember's eyes opened wider, just a little. She turned her head enough to look directly up at Evelyn's face. In that last clear gaze, there was no wildness, no fear, just recognition. Then her ribs rose one more time and didn't fall again. The quiet that followed was unlike any quiet that had ever settled over that porch. It was full, thick, pressing against all their eardrums at once. Evelyn sat there with her hand still on Ember's side, feeling nothing move beneath it. Tom bent over her, his cheek brushing the top of her head. "She's gone, Evie," he said gently. "I know," Evelyn answered. Her voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. Pastor Helen murmured a prayer. Mia's shoulders shook silently. Noah sniffed hard and swiped at his face with the back of his sleeve. Jorge stared out at the ridge, blinking fast. Even Mrs. Whitfield turned away, digging frantically in her purse for a tissue she pretended she didn't need. Ranger Cole stepped forward, laying one hand briefly on Ember's back, the way a soldier might salute a fallen comrade. "She did good," he said simply. "Real good." As the sun slipped behind the ridge, the shadows climbed the porch steps. The boards cooled under Evelyn's feet. The familiar weight of Ember against her legs was gone, leaving a space so sharp she could almost see it. Later, after Dr. Patel had taken care of the body, with the same respect he showed his human patients, after everyone had drifted down the hill in twos and threes, Evelyn stood alone on the porch. The sky was purple now, the first star already out. For the first time in more than a decade, she opened the back door and stepped into the dark house without hearing a single growl, without feeling a soft, solid body slide between her and the rest of the world. The silence followed her inside, settled in the corners, lay down on the empty rugs where Ember used to sleep. It would take time before that quiet felt like peace instead of a missing heartbeat. For a while after Ember died, Evelyn moved through the house like a ghost in her own life. She still made coffee in the mornings, still sorted donations for the thrift shop, still argued with the health insurance hotline when a bill didn't make sense. But every time she turned a corner, she half expected to see 30 pounds of spotted muscle sprawled in the doorway, watching her the way a good security camera watches a front porch. The porch itself felt wrong. The rocker was the same. The view over the Blue Ridge just as beautiful, but the space at her feet was empty. When the wind rattled the railing at night, there was no low rumble answering from the boards. Tom tried in his way. He came up the hill more often, fixed a loose step, changed a light bulb she couldn't reach. One afternoon, he spread brochures across the kitchen table, little glossy pamphlets about senior discounts, home insurance bundles, even a flyer for a financial advisor who specialized in retirement planning. "We could talk to somebody," he said, "about consolidating the credit card, maybe a small line of credit, so you're not sitting here worrying every time the mortgage rates go on the news." Evelyn looked at the papers, then at the empty patch of floor where Ember used to lie during these conversations, head between her paws, eyes tracking every rise and fall of their voices. "I'll think about it," she said, "just not today." He didn't push. He just squeezed her hand and went back down the hill, leaving her with a fridge full of leftovers and a silence she could hear ticking along with the kitchen clock. The neighbors adjusted too. Jorge still thumped mail into the box, but he didn't joke about cats chewing through windows anymore. Pastor Helen came by with casseroles and gentle prayers. Even Mrs. Whitfield, who had once worried aloud about lawsuits and liability, sent over a potted plant with a card that said simply, "I know it hurts, M." Mia came most evenings after her shift at the clinic to sit on the porch and talk about school. "Dr. Patel says I have good hands," she said one night, staring at the empty boards. "He thinks I'll make a good tech." "You will," Evelyn said. "You already have." They both fell quiet, thinking about the last time Mia had slid. A needle under Ember's skin, how the bobcat had leaned into her touch as if she were built for comfort as much as medicine. Spring came. The ice storms gave way to rain, then to a soft green wash over the hill. The thrift shop filled with people, cleaning out closets, trading winter coats for summer dresses. Life went on, because it always does, even when a part of you wants to tell it to stop and wait. It happened on a Tuesday morning, fittingly. Evelyn opened the back door to take out the trash and nearly tripped over the trash itself. The lid of the outside can was on the ground. A black trash bag lay on its side, split open. Potato peelings and coffee grounds and yesterday's newspaper were scattered across the gravel. And right in the middle of the mess, as neat as you please, sat a kitten. It was smaller than Ember had ever been, 8 weeks old at most. Its fur was a mottled gray-brown, marked with faint spots along the sides. One ear had a little notch in it. Its tail was short, not quite bobbed, not quite full, like someone had taken a regular house cat and run out of ink halfway down. The kitten was chewing determinedly on an eggshell when Evelyn opened the door. It froze, blue eyes widening. For a heartbeat they stared at each other. "You've made a mess," Evelyn said, because it was easier than saying what her heart was doing in her chest. The kitten dropped the eggshell and mewed, a surprisingly bold sound for such a scrap. Then, to her astonishment, it trotted toward her, little paws crunching on the gravel, and bumped its head against her bare ankle like they'd known each other for years. "Lord help me," Evelyn whispered. She bent stiffly, scooped the kitten up, and felt a small, fierce motor start to vibrate against her palm. The purr was higher pitched than Ember's had ever been, but the sensation was the same, a sound that traveled up her bones and straight into the hollow place behind her ribs. Inside, she set the kitten on a towel on the counter and looked it over. Too thin. Wormy belly. A faint scratch along one leg that was already scabbing over. No collar, no tag, no microchip when Mia stopped by later with a scanner from the clinic. "Looks like somebody dropped him," Mia said, scratching gently under the kitten's chin, "or he was born under somebody's porch," and wandered off. "He," Evelyn repeated. She had called Ember she for so long it felt strange. "We're sure?" "Pretty sure," Mia said and grinned. "Congratulations. It's a boy." They bathed him in the sink, which he did not appreciate, and fed him careful spoonfuls of warm food. He ate like he hadn't seen a decent meal in days. When he was done, he staggered, burped, and climbed without hesitation into Evelyn's lap, curling under her hand like he'd been built for that spot. "What are we going to call you?" she murmured, tracing the odd little tail. Up close, the pattern of his fur looked even more like a faded echo of Ember's coat, less wild, less defined, as if someone had whispered rather than shouted when they made him. "Echo," Mia said suddenly, "because he looks like a tiny echo of her, and because, I don't know, it sounds right." Evelyn rolled the word around in her mouth. Echo. It felt less like trying to replace something and more like acknowledging that some sounds linger long after they're made. "All right," she said, "Echo it is. But you're a house cat, mister. No wildlife permits, no hearings, no more forms than absolutely necessary." Echo yawned, showing a pink tongue and tiny teeth, and went back to purring. They tried to keep him inside at first. He had other ideas. Within a week, he'd found every weak spot in the screen doors, every gap under the porch railing. He didn't go far, just to the top step or the edge of the yard, but he planted himself there with comical determination, watching the road the way Ember had, only lower to the ground. "He thinks he's on patrol," Tom said one afternoon, watching the kitten sit like a small, fuzzy gargoyle on the porch rail. "Must be something in the air up here." "Or in the plumbing," Evelyn said. "Maybe the county pumped guardian spirits into our water line." They laughed, but some part of her meant it. The first time Echo growled, really growled, she almost dropped the cup in her hand. Tom was on the porch with her, going over a stack of mail that included a reminder about her life insurance policy, a glossy brochure about smart home security, and yet another envelope from the health insurance company. They were bent over the table, heads close, when tires crunched on the gravel below. A man she didn't recognize climbed out of an older pickup, the kind that had seen too many winters. He wore a cap pulled low, jacket zipped up despite the warm day. There was something about the slope of his shoulders, the way his eyes flicked automatically toward the tree line where her property met the woods, that made Evelyn's skin crawl. "Afternoon," he called, walking toward the porch. "You the lady lives here?" Tom started to say something, but Evelyn's attention had already snapped to Echo. The kitten had been dozing in a sunspot. Now he was on his feet, tail puffed, ears flat. A sound came out of him that was too big for his body, a low, rolling growl that rattled the boards under their feet. He planted himself right in front of Evelyn's shoes, between her and the stranger. Tiny body, solid as a wall. "Well now," the man said, slowing. "Didn't mean to spook anybody. Just heard you had trouble with traps up in these woods a while back. Figured maybe you'd want someone to keep an eye on the varmints for you, for a fee." His gaze slid past her to the trees again. For a heartbeat, Evelyn saw another cold night, another man-shaped shadow in the woods, a dead bobcat, and a half-frozen kitten. "I've got all the help I need," she said, voice cooler than the air. "The sheriff knows who's setting illegal traps around here. You can talk to him if you're offering services." The man's mouth tightened. "Didn't mean no harm," he muttered. "Some folks don't appreciate what it takes to keep a place safe, especially with the way the world is now." He took a step closer, as if to hand her a card, and Echo's growl deepened into something almost like Ember's old warning rumble. It vibrated straight up through Evelyn's bones. The kitten's body might have been small, but the message in that sound was ancient and unmistakable. "Mine. Back up." The man stopped. For the first time he really looked at the animal between her feet, at the short tail, the faint spots, the eyes that were not blue at all anymore, but a clear, bright gold. "Suit yourself," he said finally. "You change your mind. You know where to find me." "No," Evelyn said softly. "I don't." He turned and went back down the hill. They watched the truck rattle away and disappear around the bend. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Echo remained planted in his guard position until the sound of the engine faded completely. Only then did he relax, tail settling, ears coming up. He turned and looked up at Evelyn, as if to make sure she was still there. She bent slowly, knees complaining, and scooped him into her arms. He curled into her chest without hesitation, pressing his cheek against the soft skin at the base of her throat. The purr started again, steady and sure. Tom let out a breath he'd been holding. "You know," he said, "if you told me 10 years ago you'd rescue a bobcat kitten and end up with a house cat who thinks he's Secret Service, I'd have asked what you were putting on your cereal." "High fiber," she said, smiling. "Doctor's orders." She carried Echo to the rocker and sat down, the kitten settling across her lap like he'd been born for that spot. The hill spread out below them, green and quiet. Somewhere down there, neighbors were paying bills, checking credit card balances, watching the news, talk about mortgage rates and life insurance. And the cost of gas. Up here, on this little porch, The most important numbers were simpler. One old woman, one small beating heart, one yellow-eyed echo of a guardian who refused to let the world come too close without going through him first. She thought of that first night in the frozen woods, of Ember's last breath on these same boards, of all the years in between. "I rescued a bobcat kitten once," she said softly, more to herself than to Tom. "And now, even the house cats think it's their job to guard me." Echo rumbled in agreement, eyes half closed, listening to the sounds of the hill with the fierce attention of something much bigger than he looked. Down on the road, a car passed. On the porch, a low growl rolled out, quiet but certain, as the little cat settled more firmly against the woman he'd chosen. And on that small rise in the Blue Ridge, the house on the hill was not quite silent anymore. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Before you scroll away, tell me this. Do you believe a bond like theirs could really exist? If this story touched your heart, drop a 1 in the comments so I know you're still with me. And don't forget to subscribe, because the next story might just remind you that sometimes the wild loves us back in ways we'll never forget.